Back at the lake house again? Nicole asked her husband, Mark, with a hint of disapproval in her voice. Yep, it's good to get away, Mark replied, checking his reflection in the mirror. It's good to have some time to myself for a change, or at least I get to enjoy my days off, Mark continued. Nicole sighed. It's fine, I guess, but don't you think you're going there a little too often lately? Mark chuckled. Don't start, Nicole. It's not my fault our schedules are different. We'll go together sometime, I promise. And Mark added reassuringly, you can go alone too, you know. What would I do there all alone? Nicole asked, a playful smirk on her face. And I don't think it would be safe. Hey, I don't get eaten by bears when I'm alone, Mark teased. Are you scared to be in the house by yourself or something? No, it's not that, Nicole replied. It's just, I don't know, it feels weird being alone in a house far away from the city. You know, you don't like it there, Mark said, still smiling. And I'm not sure it's fair for you to try and keep me from doing something I enjoy. Well, if I actually forbade it, you probably wouldn't go as much, Nicole teased. She really didn't like that lake house. It had always been Mark's parents' place, a cherished retreat where they'd spent countless weekends and summers. But since his father's passing, Mark's mom couldn't bear to return. The memories were too painful, and besides, she needed to be in the city to manage the family business that she'd taken over. Nicole understood, of course, but the lake house just didn't feel like her home. It was filled with someone else's memories and decorations that didn't quite match her taste. And honestly, she wasn't much of an outdoorsy person. The quiet isolation and endless nature didn't hold the same appeal for her as it did for Mark. Mark had suggested selling the lake house before. He'd even said he didn't love it all that much, and the money could be put to better use. But his mom was adamant about keeping it. It was a piece of her husband, a tangible connection to their shared past. Plus, she had this vision of Mark and Nicole eventually taking over the house, raising their own family there, creating new memories for generations to come. Though Mark and Nicole didn't have any children, it wasn't a medical issue. They simply hadn't planned for kids yet, both focused on their careers. Nicole had a good job, earned through years of hard work, while Mark worked for the family business. Well, it wasn't exactly his business. It was mostly his mother, Gail's. She was a force of nature, a driven and hard-working woman who ran the company with an iron fist. Mark was her heir apparent, but he sometimes resented the lack of control he had over his own career path. Gail controlled the purse strings, and while she never explicitly denied Mark anything, he always felt a sense of obligation to her. He respected her, even feared her a little, and would never dare contradict her. Nicole felt the same way about Gail. While she didn't love her like a mother, she couldn't help but admire her energy and business acumen. Until recently, Mark and Nicole's relationship had been nearly perfect. They loved and respected each other, rarely arguing, and resolving any disagreements quickly and amicably. Gail didn't interfere in their personal lives, and they lived separately, keeping their contact with her to a few phone calls a week and occasional visits. But then Mark started going to the lake house more and more often, always on days when Nicole was busy with work. It was hard not to be suspicious. While Mark had never given her any reason to doubt him before, his frequent trips to the lake house, coupled with Nicole's dislike of the place, started to plant seeds of unease in her mind. What does he even do there all by himself? Nicole mused, a hint of insecurity creeping into her voice. Is he really that bored with me? She knew she couldn't stop Mark from going, but the thought nagged at her nonetheless, refusing to be completely dismissed. When he returned, Nicole asked about his weekend. Mark replied cheerfully, though he looked tired, saying it was fine but not offering any specifics. Hey Mark, don't throw that shirt in the washing machine, Nicole called out. It might not be colour fast. Where am I supposed to put it then? Mark asked, sounding exasperated. Just toss it on the hamper, I'll figure it out later, Nicole replied. Later that evening, as she picked up Mark's carelessly discarded shirt, Nicole noticed something odd. It was one of his nicer shirts, the kind he usually saved for special occasions. Why would he wear that to the lake house? And he'd taken extra care with his appearance too. Nicole's suspicions grew, It was almost as if he were dressing up for a date. A wave of nausea washed over her as she buried her face in the shirt and inhaled deeply. The unmistakable scent of women's perfume filled her nostrils. She quickly pulled away, her mind racing. Was she imagining things? She sniffed again. No, it was definitely there. The evidence was undeniable. The idea of following him to the lake house next time he goes crossed her mind, but it seemed like a drastic measure. She reasoned that if he was truly being unfaithful, their relationship was already on shaky ground. The thought of invading his privacy and spying on him made her stomach churn. The thought of confronting Mark directly filled Nicole with dread. It would mean acknowledging her insecurities and the growing rift in their relationship, a reality she desperately wished to avoid. After a day of agonizing over the situation at work, she decided to seek solace in the company of a trusted colleague, hoping to find some clarity amidst the turmoil. "Karen, I'm at a loss," Nicole confided. "Should I confront Mark head-on or—" Karen, having navigated the turbulent waters of divorce herself, offered a cautious perspective. Confronting him with accusations might backfire. He could deny everything and simply become more discreet, if there's even anything to hide in the first place. Nicole's voice held a glimmer of hope. Maybe there's nothing to worry about. But what if there is? I don't want to look like a jealous fool. That's a valid concern, Karen acknowledged. However, there's a way to get to the bottom of this without causing a scene. You could install a hidden camera at the lake house. Nicole's face lost its colour. Absolutely not, I couldn't do that. Karen, sensing her distress, quickly reassured her. It's not as drastic as it sounds. It's a common practice nowadays. We live in a world with advanced technology, Nicole. You could hire a reputable company that specializes in installing discreet surveillance cameras. They can set up a system that records and stores the footage securely without leaving any trace. That way, you can find out the truth without Mark ever suspecting a thing. Nicole hesitated, her moral compass wavering. I'm not sure. It feels wrong. Don't be foolish, Karen urged. Would you rather live in uncertainty, constantly worrying and wondering? It's better to know the truth one way or another. There's a chance it could be nothing, and he's simply taking some much-needed time for himself at his lake house. But wouldn't you rather know for sure, instead of letting these doubts consume you? Nicole's voice dripped with sarcasm as she retorted. Or maybe he's out there blowing our savings on poker with his buddies. You know how those games can get. Her underlying anxiety was palpable, even though she hadn't explicitly admitted it. Karen nodded in agreement. It could be true, but this way you'll have definitive proof. You can either put your mind at ease or, well, I won't dwell on the alternative, but at least you'll be able to make an informed decision. You've been a shell of yourself all day, Nicole. Don't let any man have that kind of power over you. Nicole sighed, acknowledging the truth in Karen's words. She had been distracted and unproductive all day, consumed by her worries. The idea of spying on Mark left a bitter taste in her mouth, but the suspicion gnawing at her wouldn't let go. That night, sleep evaded her. The thought of installing a camera felt like a violation of trust, but so did the possibility of Mark's infidelity. If their relationship was truly unraveling, it was better to face the truth head-on and move forward. If it turns out to be nothing, she whispered to herself, I'll apologize to Mark and explain everything. I'll come clean. This resolution finally allowed her to drift into a fitful slumber. The next day, after work, Nicole embarked on her covert operation. The camera was installed, hidden in plain sight. Now all she had to do was wait for Mark's next trip to the lake house. It didn't take long. He announced his plans to head out the following weekend. Nicole said nothing, offering neither objection nor reproach, but she couldn't hide her anxiety. Mark, oblivious to her inner turmoil, whistled cheerfully as he prepared for his getaway. He seemed genuinely excited, as always, to escape to the quiet solitude of the lake. The moment he left, Nicole's spying began in earnest. She glanced at the clock every few minutes, counting down the time until Mark would arrive at the lake house. What would she see? Would it be something innocent or something that would confirm her worst fears? A part of her wished she could just turn off the camera and pretend everything was fine. If only she could go back to a time when she had complete trust in Mark, when their love felt secure and unwavering. But that time was gone, replaced by doubt and suspicion. With each passing minute, her fears grew stronger, her mind filled with images of Mark's betrayal. The word cheating echoed in her head, a painful reminder of the uncertainty that now clouded their relationship. The next day, after work, Nicole embarked on her covert operation. The camera was installed, hidden in plain sight. Now all she had to do was wait for Mark's next trip to the lake house. It didn't take long. He announced his plans to head out the following weekend. Nicole said nothing, offering neither objection nor reproach, but she couldn't hide her anxiety. Mark, oblivious to her inner turmoil, whistled cheerfully as he prepared for his getaway. He seemed genuinely excited as always to escape to the quiet solitude of the lake. The moment he left, Nicole's spying began in earnest. She glanced at the clock every few minutes, counting down the time until Mark would arrive at the lake house. What would she see? Would it be something innocent or something that would confirm her worst fears? A part of her wished she could just turn off the camera and pretend everything was fine. If only she could go back to a time when she had complete trust in Mark, when their love felt secure and unwavering. But that time was gone, replaced by doubt and suspicion. With each passing minute, her fears grew stronger, her mind filled with images of Mark's betrayal. The word cheating echoed in her head, a painful reminder of the uncertainty that now clouded their relationship. Nicole paced back and forth, her anxiety mounting. She flitted between the computer and her phone, tempted to warn Mark about the camera. Maybe he'd come home, and she could avoid discovering something she didn't want to know. Maybe their relationship could go back to how it was before. But if there was nothing to hide, why was she so worried? She glanced at the clock again. Mark should have arrived by now. He'd be getting out of the car, unlocking the door. What would happen next? Should she turn on the camera or not? She went to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and chugged it down. Enough, Nicole, she scolded herself. Just do it. If he's cheating, you'll deal with it then. There's no point agonizing over it now. Steeling herself, she turned on the live feed and stared at the screen, her eyes squeezed shut. After a moment, she forced herself to look. The lake house was empty, Mark wasn't there yet. She breathed a sigh of relief. Maybe he was just running late. Maybe he really was just going to hang out with his friends and play cards. Maybe they'd have a few beers but no other company. She found herself praying for that outcome. But then the door opened and Mark walked in, a woman clinging to him. He laughed and spun her around, their voices echoing through the empty house. "Freedom!" Mark exclaimed. "We have all the time in the world. I decided to stay the night. Finally!" "I'm so tired of sneaking around," the woman said, her voice breathless. "I'm tired of going home to an empty house, the boredom, the loneliness. I don't want to live like this anymore. Tell me, when can we be together for real? It would be so perfect here, just the two of us." "Darling, please," Mark said, trying to calm her down. "Let's save this discussion for later." "But we have so much to do now," she purred, already starting to undress herself and Mark. It was clear what she had in mind. Unable to bear witnessing any further, Nicole resolutely made the decision to divorce Mark. The thought of breaking the news to Mark's mother weighed heavily on Nicole's mind. She didn't want to upset the elderly woman who, despite her initial reservations about Nicole, held traditional values and frowned upon divorce. Nicole worked up her courage and called Gail. "Could I come over? There's something important I need to talk to you about." Soon enough, Nicole was sitting across from her mother-in-law. She took a deep breath and said, "Gail, I want to leave Mark." She paused, then added, "I have proof that he's been seeing someone else. I put a camera up at the lake house." Gail's face didn't change. She took the phone Nicole offered and looked at the video. After a moment, she turned away, unable to watch anymore. "I don't need to see any more of that," she said firmly. "This just proves what I was already thinking." Gail reached out and took Nicole's hand. "I'm not saying what Mark did is right," she said, her voice shaking a little. "But I'm not going to blame him either. It's your marriage and I've never gotten involved before. But there's something else I need to tell you." Gail pulled out a folder with some papers inside. "Here, read this." Nicole looked at the first line and her eyes went wide. It was a will. Gail wasn't old, but it made sense for her to have one. What shocked Nicole was who Gail had left everything to. It wasn't Mark, but a man named Paul Williams. Nicole had never even heard of him. "Why?" she asked, looking up at Gail. "It's time I had a will in order," Gail replied, "and this is it. I'm very sick, Nicole. Please don't be sad or surprised. This is something that happens to everyone eventually. It's just happening to me a bit sooner than I'd like, but we don't get to choose these things. I didn't leave anything to Mark because I don't fully trust him with the business," Gail continued, "and after what you've shown me, I trust him even less. He has his good points, but he can be young acting and irresponsible. I know Paul, and I'm sure he won't let my company go to waste like Mark might." "I understand," Nicole said quietly. "I'm so sorry to hear about your illness, Gail. And I'm sure you understand that Mark doesn't need to know about any of this," Gail added. "Not about my illness, and definitely not about the will." Nicole nodded, unsure of what to say. Gail had asked her not to pry or offer sympathy, and Nicole wouldn't. She sat in silence, trying to process everything she'd just learned. In the ensuing days, Mark returned from his business trip to an icy reception. Nicole, armed with the damning recording, wasted no time in announcing her intention to divorce. Mark, much to Nicole's surprise, wasn't prepared for this turn of events. He stammered, pleaded, and attempted to explain away the incident as a fluke, a one-time lapse in judgment. But Nicole remained unmoved. The damage was done. She dismissed his excuses, refusing to engage in further discussion. She was hurt, disappointed, and above all, resolute in her decision. Mark, initially flustered, eventually gave up his attempts at reconciliation. He too waved his hand dismissively, a silent acknowledgement of his guilt. Despite her resolve, Nicole couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness. Her marriage, once a source of joy and companionship, was crumbling before her eyes. She tried to rationalize her feelings, reminding herself that Mark was the one at fault. Yet a part of her wished things could be different. Meanwhile, Mark, though initially shaken, soon found solace in his mistress's comforting presence. He knew she had long harbored dreams of marrying him, and the prospect of finally fulfilling her wish filled him with a sense of anticipation. He convinced himself that the divorce was ultimately for the best, that she would make him happier than Nicole ever could. Nicole, aware of Mark's growing closeness to her, couldn't help but feel a twinge of jealousy. But she quickly pushed aside those feelings, reminding herself that she was not the one to blame. If Mark had truly valued their marriage, he wouldn't have strayed. Days turned into weeks, and the chasm between Nicole and Mark grew wider. They lived under the same roof, but their interactions were strained and filled with unspoken resentment. The once vibrant home was now shrouded in an oppressive silence, a constant reminder of their shattered love. However, Nicole reasoned, the situation wasn't as dire as it could have been. They had no children to complicate matters, and their assets were easily divisible. Each would retain their own interests, with Mark keeping the bulk of their shared wealth. Nicole knew that Mark, with his business acumen, would always land on his feet. This realization made the divorce process surprisingly smooth. The lack of children and property disputes meant there were no legal hurdles to overcome. Nicole simply packed her belongings and moved into a rented apartment, feeling a mix of resentment and relief. Her friends offered their support, assuring her that she had made the right decision. They reminded her that it was better to discover the truth sooner rather than later, avoiding years of drawn-out misery. Nicole agreed, finding solace in their words, yet a deeper worry gnawed at her. Gail, Mark's mother, was ailing, and her time was limited. Nicole hadn't shared this news with Mark, knowing it would devastate him. He was deeply attached to his mother, and the impending loss would undoubtedly shatter him. Moreover, Gail held the reins of the family's financial empire. Mark's ownership of the company was largely nominal, and upon his mother's passing, he would inherit next to nothing. The realization of this financial blow would be a harsh reality for Mark to face. Nicole wondered how Mark would cope with the double blow of losing his mother and his financial security, but she quickly dismissed these thoughts, reminding herself that Mark had his mistress for comfort now. She, on the other hand, had lost nothing of real value. Mark, with his philandering ways, was no great loss. She had always prided herself on her independence and self-sufficiency, relying on no one but herself. With a stable job and a steady income, Nicole was confident in her ability to move forward. It was Mark who would suffer the consequences of his actions, losing both his mother and his financial safety net. Nicole reaffirmed to herself that she was not the one who had betrayed their vows. She was the one who had been wronged, and she refused to shoulder the blame for their failed marriage. And Mark was an adult, capable of living his life as he pleased. There was no need for Nicole to worry about his well-being. It was time for her to embark on a new chapter, to embrace her youth and pursue a future filled with possibilities. Initially, these thoughts offered little solace. The pain of the divorce lingered, casting a shadow over her days. But as time passed, Nicole gradually came to terms with the end of her marriage. She even began to feel a sense of liberation, a newfound independence. However, her newfound peace was shattered by the news of Gail's passing. Though no longer technically related to the family, Nicole felt compelled to attend the funeral out of respect for the woman who had once been her mother-in-law. Gail was a well-respected figure in their town, and the funeral was attended by a large crowd of mourners. Nicole noticed Mark standing by a nearby grave, his body racked with sobs. Concerned onlookers offered him water and words of comfort, but nothing could ease his grief. Nicole's heart ached for her ex-husband. She knew how deeply he had loved his mother, and the loss was undoubtedly devastating. A part of her longed to offer him a comforting touch, but she held back, fearing it would be misinterpreted. After the burial, as the mourners gathered for a reception, Nicole kept her distance from Mark, not wanting to stir up any unpleasant emotions. She had no desire to tend to his emotional wounds, especially after the pain he had caused her. To her relief, the funeral proceedings passed without incident. Mark, though visibly drunk, was escorted home and put to bed. However, an unpleasant scene awaited them a couple of days later at the memorial service gathering to commemorate the deceased. Mark was once again weeping uncontrollably, but this time his tears were not solely for his mother. Nicole had decided this visit would be her last. A new storm was brewing, and the tension hung heavy in the air. She could sense it. The will was read. "Can you believe it?" Mark wailed. Mom, what have you done? Why would you do this to me?" His voice was filled with incredulity. "Can you imagine? She left everything to some complete stranger. I don't even know him." "Who is this guy?" he sputtered, his voice laced with outrage. "Who the heck is Paul Williams? Or is he her young lover? I saw his birth date. He's not much older than me." "It must be true," he mumbled, his tone shifting to bitter accusation. He must have swindled her in her old age. Now he's probably rubbing his hands together in glee. "Enough," a voice interrupted, unable to bear the slander any longer. "How dare you speak ill of your mother? This Paul guy is not her lover, and I resent your insinuation. I won't allow you to insult Gail." "Who the heck are you?" Mark asked, completely surprised. "I'm the guy, Paul Williams," the stranger revealed, shocking Mark even more. Mark, furious, lunged at him, but too drunk, stumbled and fell to the floor. People helped him up, but his second attempt to punch Paul failed again. Paul decided to leave, stating he would contact Mark with more information about the will. "Furthermore, in accordance with her wishes, I will provide you with a sufficient weekly allowance for your living expenses," he added before leaving. Nicole chose not to witness the ensuing chaos and quietly slipped away. It was not her place to get involved in this family drama. She had paid her respects to Gail, and that was enough. She had her own problems to deal with. These problems were not related to her personal life, but to her work. Her new boss at the company seemed to have taken an immediate dislike to her. Nicole couldn't understand why, but no matter how hard she tried to win his favor, nothing worked. He nitpicked at every little thing, blamed her for everything that went wrong, and eventually she reached her breaking point. She resigned, knowing she couldn't work peacefully under such conditions. It was time for a fresh start, a new job. She tried to convince herself of this, but the reality of finding new employment proved to be more challenging than she had anticipated. Before her dismissal, Nicole had received several promising leads for new positions. One company had even extended an offer with a lucrative salary, and she had seen online postings for roles that matched her qualifications perfectly. However, when she actively pursued these opportunities, they seemed to vanish into thin air. The company she had been counting on underwent a sudden restructuring, eliminating the position she had been offered. The other advertised roles turned out to be far less appealing than they had appeared online. Feeling discouraged and lost, Nicole was approached on the street by a man she didn't immediately recognize. It was Paul Williams, the heir to Gail's estate. After formal introductions, Paul explained that Gail had included a special provision in her will. "She asked me to look out for you as well," he revealed. "After learning about how your husband treated you, she worried that you might fall into a depression. She wanted me to help you if things took a turn for the worse." Nicole sighed. "I suppose you could say that's happened. I've lost my job and haven't been able to find a new one. But I'll manage. I don't need any help." Paul smiled gently. "Perhaps not, but at least allow me to tell you who I am and why Gail left everything to me instead of Mark. After all, he was her son and she loved him dearly, or at least I believe so." Nicole nodded, curious to hear his story. "I am also her son," Paul admitted, "a mistake of her youth, so to speak." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "She gave birth to me when she was very young, even before she was married. She felt pressured to give me up for adoption and never looked back. For years, I don't know if she even remembered me, but she certainly never reached out." Nicole gasped. "I had no idea Gail had such a past, that she had another child, or that she could abandon him and then try to make amends in this way." Paul continued, "She eventually found me, but we didn't connect for a long time. However, she had the opportunity to learn about me, including my business acumen and accomplishments." "Not to boast," Paul began, "but I'm a skilled manager. Gail was confident that I wouldn't mismanage her business." "Why didn't you tell Mark this?" Nicole asked, curious. "I doubt he would have been receptive to the news. You saw his reaction earlier." Paul paused, then added, "Perhaps I will tell him eventually, but not now. It's not the right time." "So you're out of a job," Paul said, changing the subject. "Would you consider working for me? I'm planning to expand my business, and I need a specialist like you." Nicole hesitated. "I don't know, they say it's not always a good idea to mix business with personal relationships." Paul chuckled. "True, but this wouldn't be a personal relationship. You'd be working for me at my request, not because we are related." "Well, if you put it that way," Nicole relented, "I suppose I could give it a try. Thank you." Although she wasn't entirely comfortable with the idea, Nicole accepted the offer. There were no other viable options at the moment. As she delved into her new role, she was pleasantly surprised to find that the job was more fulfilling than she had anticipated. Meanwhile, Mark remained consumed by bitterness and resentment. Whether he had learned the truth about Paul's identity or not seemed irrelevant. All he knew was that this man had taken away his inheritance, and that Nicole, his ex-wife who had betrayed him during a difficult time, was now working for him. He felt like a loser, defeated on all fronts. Even the woman he had cheated on Nicole with had grown distant upon discovering that he wasn't the heir to Gail's fortune. While she might tolerate him for a while longer, Mark knew their relationship wouldn't last. Desperation set in, and Mark decided his only recourse was to sabotage his perceived enemies, Nicole and Paul. He filed complaints with various authorities, accusing their company of numerous violations. But to his dismay, the inspectors found nothing amiss. The company was operating perfectly legally. Paul, however, saw these complaints as a wake-up call. He realized that great wealth didn't always equate to happiness. Having grown up in orphanages and achieved everything through hard work and determination, he had dreamed of a life like this. Yet, now that it had arrived, he wasn't prepared for the challenges it brought. Paul faced a constant stream of complaints and challenges from envious competitors and disgruntled former employees. However, he had grown accustomed to such obstacles and managed to overcome them with relative ease, avoiding major setbacks. One day, a new employee joined the company, a young and attractive woman named Olivia. Her face seemed familiar to Nicole, but since they didn't work directly together, she couldn't quite place her. It was clear, though, that Olivia was making a concerted effort to charm their boss, Paul. Given Paul's circumstances, this wasn't a difficult task. At 30 years old, he had never been married, despite harboring a childhood dream of having a large family. His previous relationships had all fizzled out, and his focus on building a stable foundation for his future family had left him with little time for romance. He had seen firsthand how financial problems could tear families apart, and he wanted to ensure he could provide a comfortable life for his loved ones. But now that he had achieved financial security, it seemed that the right opportunity for love had eluded him. But most young women he met seemed more interested in his wealth than in him. Then came Olivia, a young woman who, at first glance, appeared to be another gold digger. However, there was something different about her. She showed genuine interest in Paul as a person, not just as a wealthy businessman. Her sincerity was hard to deny, and Paul found himself falling for her. Meanwhile, Nicole suddenly remembered why Olivia's face seemed familiar. She was the woman Mark had cheated on her with, the catalyst for their divorce. Had Olivia now set her sights on Paul, or was there a more sinister motive at play? Nicole couldn't be sure, but she knew that Mark was likely behind this. In his quest for revenge, he wouldn't hesitate to use Olivia to undermine his perceived enemies. With this realization, Nicole decided to speak to Paul. Their relationship had evolved beyond a purely professional one, and they had become friends. Bypassing Olivia, who was sitting in the reception area, Nicole entered Paul's office and asked for his attention. "Paul," Nicole began, hesitant, "I don't want to pry into your personal life, but I feel obligated to say something. I see you've developed a relationship with Olivia. That's great, and I hope you're happy, but she was Mark's lover, my ex-husband, and your half-brother." Paul smiled wryly. "It seems you are prying after all. I'm not interested in Olivia's past, and I don't understand why it concerns you." Nicole felt a surge of annoyance. The conversation wasn't going as she had intended. "I'm not interested in it either," she retorted. "I'm just saying that her intentions might not be what you think." Paul had definitely misread her concern as jealousy. "You don't think Mark has calmed down after losing his inheritance?" she asked, his tone hardening. "What does any of this have to do with him?" Paul asked, his surprise catching Nicole off guard. "Mark's feelings are irrelevant to me," said Paul, then continued. "I pay him a decent salary, and he knows he can't expect anything more from me. Olivia and I are together, whether you like it or not, or perhaps you had hoped to take her place." Paul's words stung, and Nicole felt deeply offended by his assumption. "What are you talking about?" she exclaimed. "I'm not interested in you romantically, and I never was. I'm just trying to warn you as a friend." Nicole stormed out of the office, slamming the door behind her. Olivia, witnessing the scene, flashed a triumphant smile and slipped into Paul's office. "What did she want?" Olivia asked, her voice dripping with smug satisfaction. "She was shouting so loudly I thought you two were about to come to blows. Were you having an affair with her?" "Don't be ridiculous," Paul replied, rolling his eyes. "I never liked her much, and as I understand it, she had some designs on me." "Oh, I have no doubt," Olivia purred. "She's a real shark. She dumped Mark as soon as she realized he was penniless without his mother. Then she probably thought she could latch on to you." "But thankfully I met you first," Paul said, and the couple shared a tender kiss. Meanwhile, Nicole, hurt and humiliated by Paul's words, drafted a resignation letter. Unbeknownst to her, she had started developing feelings for him. She didn't want to admit it, but the friendship they shared had sparked a glimmer of hope in her lonely heart. That hope was now crushed, replaced by a deep sense of betrayal. Nicole decided she had done all she could. She had warned Paul, and if he chose to be offended instead of listening to reason, then that was his problem. It was not her place to interfere in his personal affairs. They were in love, and who was she to stand in the way of their happiness? With a heavy heart, Nicole continued her job search, feeling disheartened and alone. One day, she unexpectedly ran into Mark on the street. "Well, well, well," he sneered. "I don't see any triumph in your eyes. You should be happy to be rid of me." Nicole tried to walk past him, but he wouldn't let her go. "Come on, Nicole, don't be like that," he pleaded. "We're not strangers, you know. I'm sorry for what I said. I was just upset." "So I hear you're out of a job," he continued, changing the subject. Nicole was startled. "How do you know that?" she asked, a flicker of suspicion crossing her mind. "Rumors spread fast," Mark shrugged. "I told you should have stayed away from that Paul. He wants to ruin us all." "I don't know what you're talking about, Mark," Nicole said, her voice firm. "I've decided to move on from all of this. I have enough problems of my own." She walked away, ending the conversation abruptly. But a nagging worry remained. If Olivia was still in contact with Mark, it could mean they were conspiring against Paul. Nicole had tried to warn Paul, but he hadn't believed her. Now she felt it was best to stay out of it and let Paul deal with the consequences. Meanwhile, Paul had already moved on from the confrontation with Nicole. He and Olivia were deeply engrossed in their relationship, making plans for their future together. "What are we waiting for?" Paul asked one evening. "Move in with me, today. I don't want to be apart from you for another minute." Olivia readily agreed, and from that day on, she was constantly by his side. Nicole continued her job hunt, visiting countless interviews and sending out resumes. She needed money to pay rent, and with each passing day, her financial situation grew more precarious. In desperation, she accepted a position far below her qualifications and experience. One afternoon, as she was leaving work, she bumped into Jessica, an acquaintance from Paul's company. They exchanged pleasantries and decided to catch up over coffee at a nearby cafe. Nicole didn't dare ask about her former boss, but Jessica brought him up on her own. "Did you hear? Our dear boss Paul has been sick for a month now, and I've heard he's not even in the hospital." Nicole was taken aback. "What? Is it serious?" "I don't know the details, but Olivia isn't working anymore. She's taking care of him," Jessica replied. Nicole frowned. Why haven't they sought help from a clinic or hospital? Even a general practitioner could offer some guidance. Jessica shrugged. "The rich have their quirks, I guess, but Olivia seems to be looking after him. I've seen her taking him for walks in his wheelchair every day to get some fresh air in the park." Nicole's heart sank. "In a wheelchair?" she whispered, her voice filled with concern. They chatted a little longer before parting ways. Nicole walked home in a state of agitation. Paul hadn't listened to her warning, and now he was suffering. She couldn't shake the feeling that Olivia was somehow involved in his illness and that she didn't want him to recover. The following weekend, Nicole went to the park where Jessica had seen Olivia taking Paul for walks. It didn't take long for her to spot them. Olivia was pushing the wheelchair, looking visibly irritated. As Nicole got closer, she overheard Olivia snapping at Paul. "You know, Paul, if you weren't so helpless, my life would be a lot easier," Olivia hissed. "I'm tired of wasting my time on you." Nicole wasn't really surprised to hear it. Her suspicions might be confirmed. At least she could tell that Olivia was only after his money. When Olivia stepped away for a moment, leaving Paul unattended, Nicole seized the opportunity to approach him. "What happened?" she asked, her voice full of concern. "How did you get sick? What do the doctors say? Are you getting treatment?" "Of course I'm getting treatment," Paul replied weakly. "I have a good doctor, but he can't seem to figure out what's wrong with me." "It's a very complicated case," Paul said weakly. "But what does that mean?" Nicole pressed. "What is he treating you for? What kind of treatment is it, if he doesn't even know what's wrong?" "He's a good doctor," Paul insisted. "He's just prescribing some medicine and vitamins. But as you can see, It's not helping. Not helping? Nicole echoed in disbelief. Is the disease progressing? Unfortunately, yes, Paul admitted, but he assures me that everything will be fine in the end. He's a specialist, with a scientific degree. But is he the only doctor you're seeing? Has he consulted with anyone else? Nicole's frustration was growing. Why not get a second opinion? You could even call a doctor from the local clinic. What's the point of those state doctors? Paul scoffed. They're only good for discharging patients, and that's not what I need right now. It was clear that Paul's newfound wealth had changed his perspective. He believed that money could cure anything, and the fact that his condition was worsening didn't seem to faze him. The doctor's reassurances were enough for him. You know what, Paul? Nicole said resolutely. I'm calling a taxi right now, and we're going to a good clinic. A private one, don't worry. They'll examine you and figure out what's going on. No objections. She pulled out her phone and started dialing. Paul grumbled, It's easy for you to do whatever you want now. I can't even argue. Don't be dramatic, Nicole retorted. I'm just worried about you, okay? You'll feel better once you're properly diagnosed. I feel fine at home, Paul insisted. Olivia is taking good care of me. Nicole scoffed. Oh, really? If she behaves like that in public, I can only imagine what it's like at home. Don't say that, Paul protested weakly, but he didn't offer any defense for Olivia. Deep down, he knew Nicole was right. Since he had fallen ill, he had become a burden to Olivia. She didn't hide her frustration, and sometimes he felt like she was just waiting for him to die. He even doubted the treatments she brought home from who knows where, so when the taxi arrived, he didn't resist. He just asked Nicole to make sure he got better quickly, as Olivia would be worried about him. Should we let Olivia know that we're heading to the clinic? Paul asked, surprising Nicole. She barely recognized him. This wasn't the Paul she knew. He was acting like a child, or at least it seemed that way to her. Oh, call your precious Olivia, Nicole retorted, her voice laced with anger. You'll see how upset she'll be about this, because I'm sure she's the reason you're sick. How can you say that? You don't even know her, Paul protested, trying to deflect the accusation. He was tempted to repeat his earlier suspicion that Nicole wanted Olivia's place, but he knew deep down that it wasn't true. Without further delay, Nicole rushed him to a reputable private clinic. It didn't take long for the doctors to diagnose his condition. The case was indeed serious. They questioned Paul about his previous treatment and the medications he had been taking. Paul couldn't recall all the names, but the ones he mentioned, along with the medicine bottles he had brought with him, were enough to alarm the medical team. This isn't treatment, Mr. Williams, one doctor declared gravely. This is attempted murder. These medications, in this combination, are incredibly dangerous. Paul was stunned. He couldn't believe that Olivia, the woman he was going to marry and build a family with, would intentionally harm him. No, there must be some mistake, he mumbled. Nobody wants to hurt me, and the doctor I was seeing isn't a bad person. We're not so sure about that, another doctor interjected. Prescribing such a combination of drugs is a criminal offense. What clinic does he work at? I don't know, Paul admitted. Nobody knows. That's because he probably doesn't exist, the doctor said. No sane person, even with basic medical training, would prescribe those drugs. Nicole, who had been silently observing the exchange, spoke up. Will you provide us with a written report on this? She asked. I'm certain we need to report this to the police. Olivia is clearly in cahoots with my ex-husband. No, Nicole, Paul pleaded. I beg you, don't do that. We won't involve the police or anyone else. I'll agree to be treated here by these doctors, but please leave Olivia out of it. Of course, if it turns out you're right, I won't have anything more to do with her. Nicole was taken aback by his request. There's nothing to investigate, Paul, she said. But if you insist, you can continue seeing her. However, you must agree to be treated here. Otherwise, your future is bleak. Paul sighed. I understand, Nicole. You're probably right. And what kind of future could I have with her anyway? Even if I recover, what then? I wouldn't want to spend another day with Olivia. Finally, Nicole said, a sense of relief washing over her. That's a sound decision, Nicole exclaimed. And if you think I'm acting out of selfish motives, Then so be it. Think whatever you want. But as you can see, I was right about Olivia. Paul sighed. Yes, it seems you were. I'm sorry, Nicole. I didn't mean to hurt you. I must have gotten carried away. He paused for a moment, then added, I apologize for my earlier accusations. I clearly overestimated myself. Paul then called Olivia, informing her that he had been taken to the clinic. He omitted Nicole's name, claiming he had suddenly fallen ill on the street and a passerby had called an ambulance. Oh my God, Olivia exclaimed, sounding genuinely concerned. I'll come pick you up right away. You shouldn't be in that clinic. You'll receive much better care at home. The doctor and I won't let your condition worsen. But your doctor doesn't even know what's wrong with me, Paul countered. The doctors here have already diagnosed me and started treatment. What are you talking about? Olivia asked, confusion evident in her voice. Dr. Miller is a highly skilled specialist, a doctor of medical sciences. Oh, really? You can tell that to the police now, Paul said mockingly. Are you crazy? Olivia cried. How can you accuse me of something like this, after I've been nursing you like a baby for over a month? Olivia, please, Paul said wearily. You know exactly what I'm accusing you of, and you should be grateful I haven't decided to file a police report yet. Olivia hung up, realizing her game was over. She hadn't intended to cause Paul any serious harm. Her plan was simply to live with him, enjoying the comfortable lifestyle he provided, and to secure her future by marrying him. But then Mark had interfered. He had convinced her to eliminate Paul if necessary. You don't understand, you fool, he had said. Do you want to be dependent on him for the rest of your life, always at risk of him leaving you for some younger, prettier woman? Time is running out, and you're not getting any younger. Didn't that ever occur to you? Mark taunted. And I'm offering you a chance to get everything. I hope you won't forget about me. And don't you want us to be together and live happily ever after? At the time, these arguments had seemed compelling to Olivia. She was apprehensive about Mark's scheme, but he assured her she was in no danger. He had found a man to pose as a doctor and prescribe seemingly harmless medication that would gradually poison Paul. Blinded by her own greed and ambition, Olivia had participated in the scheme. But when Olivia learned that Paul was in the hospital receiving proper medical care, the reality of their actions hit her. In a panic, she called Mark. Can you believe the mess you've gotten me into? She cried. We're going to be charged with attempted murder. How could you let this happen? Mark exploded. Paul was never supposed to see any other doctors. I warned you repeatedly. How was I supposed to know? Olivia retorted. He collapsed on the street. People called an ambulance, that's all. Why was he alone on the street? Mark accused. This is your fault. You were too lazy to even take him for a walk. Now you'll have to deal with the consequences. I had nothing to do with any of this. You know what? I'm tired and sick of you and your games. Enough is enough. Yes, we had a fling, Olivia retorted. But it's over, and I don't want anything to do with you anymore. Mark hung up and frantically began packing his belongings, intending to flee before the authorities caught up with him. He knew he could deny involvement all he wanted, but the evidence against him was overwhelming. Olivia also planned to disappear, unaware that Paul had decided to forgive her. He felt a sense of gratitude for their time together. Though his romantic feelings had faded, the memories remained. During his treatment, he realized he had been wrong from the start. He had fallen for Olivia's sweet words and passionate declarations, while wrongly accusing the one person who genuinely cared for him. On the other hand, Nicole had decided she had nothing more to do with Paul. She had saved him from Olivia's machinations, and that was all she had intended. However, Paul, deeply moved by her selfless act and unwavering support, was determined to win her back. He realized that in her strength and compassion, he had found a love deeper and truer than he had ever known. He showered her with attention and affection, proving his genuine remorse and his desire to build a future together. Slowly, Nicole began to open her heart again, acknowledging the love that had blossomed amidst adversity. In a heartfelt moment, she finally said yes to his proposal, understanding that her feelings for Paul had been the driving force behind her unwavering support. They were married in a beautiful ceremony, surrounded by loved ones, and embarked on a new chapter filled with love, trust, and the promise of a happy future. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Like, share, and leave a comment to let us know your thoughts. Your support helps us create more engaging content for you. Thanks for watching.